The mission had begun. Dust clawed at their throats as the helicopter lifted away, its thunder fatting into the night sky. The sudden absence of noise pressed down on them, heavier than the packs strapped to their backs. Only the crunch of boots against loose gravel and the metallic clicks of gear shifting in the dark remained. She moved at the edge of the formation, eyes scanning the ridgelines. The valley lay before them like an animal lying in wait, silent but not still. Every step forward felt like walking into a memory she had spent years burying. The commander gave hand signals, sharp and precise, pointing them toward the ridge. The others adjusted their night vision goggles, green light flickering across faces tight with focus. They didn't question the path. They trusted the briefing, the plan. But her stomach tightened, the ridge always the ridge. She remembered her brother's voice echoing against those same rocks, a warning shouted mid-step, a laugh forced to cut the silence. The shot that silenced him. She clenched her jaw until it ached, the memory trying to force itself into the present. The young soldier from earlier glanced at her as if sensing something unsettled. His breathing was sharp, uneven, like a drummer playing too fast. She raised her hand slightly, just 2 fingers pressed downward. Slow down, breathe. He nodded, the gesture steadied him. But she couldn't steady herself, not yet. They climbed, boots slipping against loose stones, shadows shifting with every cautious step. The commander paused near a boulder, scanning the path. He gave another signal, hold. The team froze. Breathless silence filled the air. She crouched low, her rifle against her shoulder, eyes narrowing through the scope. The rocks ahead looked wrong. Too clean, too arranged. She had seen this before. A blind spot, deliberate, deadly. She wanted to speak. She could feel the words rise to her lips, pressing hard against the wall she had built inside herself. But the old fear gripped her throat. If she said it out loud, she would have to admit it. Admit that she had been here, that she had failed here, that her silence had cost her brother's life. Her hands tightened on the weapon. The team waited for the commander's move. Seconds stretched thin. And then, barely audible, she whispered, just enough for the soldier nearest her to hear. Not the ridge. He frowned, leaning closer. What? Her eyes didn't move from the scope. Her voice was steady, even if her pulse was. Not the ridge, it's wrong. The soldier glanced toward the commander, uncertain. The chain of command was clear. Voices traveled through rank, not whispers from the quiet one in the shadows. But something in her tone, quiet yet unshaken, made him hesitate. The commander looked back, impatient. What's the hold? The soldier gestured toward her. For the first time that night, all eyes turned her way. Her chest tightened as the silence shifted. The team waited, not for orders, for her. It had been years since anyone waited for her to speak. She lowered the rifle, her voice firmer now, carrying just enough weight to break through the night. The ridge is watched. Cross here, you'll light up half the valley. The commander's jaw flexed. He didn't like interruptions, but she didn't flinch. She held his gaze, her silence carrying more weight than a yell ever could. Finally, he motioned them lower, toward the riverbed below. A change in plan, quiet agreement. They moved, and as they descended into the darkness, she felt it, that crack in the wall she had built. Her silence was no longer just burden. It was choice, and choice meant risk. The riverbed was cold, the stones slick beneath their boots. Water whispered around them, masking the sound of movement. Overhead, the ridgeline loomed black against the sky, like a scar she couldn't stop staring at. Every step felt heavier, every sound sharper. The team's breathing became rhythm. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. A chorus of living bodies pressing into the unknown. The young soldier stumbled slightly, his boot slipping on a wet stone. She reached out instinctively, steadying him with a firm grip. He gave a quick nod of thanks, eyes wide with nerves. She saw herself in him, not the fighter she had become, but the hesitant soldier she once was, before silence became her shield. They pushed forward, and with every step deeper into the valley, she felt the pull of memory, like invisible hands dragging her backward. The sound of her brother's laugh haunted the space between her breaths. The echo of his final scream filled the pauses where words should be. When the team halted again, the commander knelt beside her. For the first time, his voice dropped low, almost curious. "You've been here before, haven't you?" She didn't answer. Her silence was confirmation enough. He studied her for a moment, then looked away. Maybe he understood. Maybe he didn't. It didn't matter. Because the valley remembered her, and she remembered it. They pressed on through the night, the target still miles ahead. But something shifted within the team. They glanced at her differently now, not as the quiet shadow, but as someone who carried knowledge none of them had. Someone whose silence carried weight. And for the first time since her brother's death, she felt it again. That fragile, dangerous thing she had buried with him. Hoping. Why did the valley feel alive, as though it were watching them? The question pressed on every nerve as the team moved deeper into the shadows. The valley had no voice, yet it seemed to breathe. The wind funneled through jagged rocks, whispering in tones that sounded too much like words. Stones shifted under boots, tumbling into silence, each one echoing like a signal sent to waiting ears. The woman kept her eyes on the ridges, her rifle steady, every muscle taut. She could feel the weight of unseen eyes above them. She knew that sensation, knew it too well. She had once ignored it. That mistake had cost her more than a teammate. It had cost her family. Now she refused to ignore it again. The commander raised his fist. The team froze. Ahead, faint lights flickered between trees, too small to be a camp, too deliberate to be random. A patrol, maybe two. Their shadows stretched unnaturally tall in the green haze of night vision goggles. The young soldier beside her shifted nervously, his breathing louder than it should have been. She touched his shoulder, steadying him again with that same silent gesture. Her silence worked like gravity, pulling others back into calm. The commander motioned for the squad to split, half to circle left, half right. She found herself with the right flank, moving through brush that cracked softly beneath careful steps. She led with her eyes, not her voice, scanning, calculating. And then movement. Two enemy soldiers walked into view, rifles slung lazily, talking in hushed tones. Their language was foreign, but the cadence was unmistakable, casual, careless. The kind of talk that only came from men who believed they owned the ground they walked on. The squad froze. Orders crackled through the earpiece. "Wait for my signal." But waiting was dangerous. The patrol was closing in, and soon they would step directly into the squad's path. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She saw the angle, the shadowed hollow just to the right, a way around, a way to move without fire, without blood, without noise. No one else saw it, not yet. Her lips parted. The words pressed against her teeth, desperate to break free. But again, the fear. What if speaking shattered everything? What if her voice, so long unused, broke the fragile balance she had built inside herself? She made her choice. Her hand lifted, two fingers cutting sideways, pointing to the hollow. A silent order, not shouted, not debated, just shown. The squad hesitated, briefly, then followed. They trusted her silence now more than they had trusted words in the briefing room. They slipped into the hollow, the patrol passing only feet above them. She heard their voices fade, laughter swallowed by the valley's breath. No shots, no noise, no lives wasted. When the squad regrouped, the commander gave her a long look. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. That glance was acknowledgement enough. But the weight inside her didn't lift, because she knew the valley would not let them pass so easily. Hours bled together as they moved under the blanket of night. The cold settled into bones, numbing fingers, tightening muscles. The young soldier stumbled again, exhaustion pulling him down. She caught him before he fell, easing him against a rock. His face was pale, his lips trembling. He whispered, "I don't think I can make it." She crouched beside him, her eyes holding his. For the first time she spoke soft, barely audible. "You will." 2 words, that was all. But they carried more weight than any pep talk, more strength than any shouted order. The soldier nodded. It wasn't belief, it was trust. And in that fragile exchange she felt a crack of warmth, a reminder that silence didn't mean absence. Sometimes silence made words matter more. The squad moved again, pressing toward the heart of the valley. The moon dipped lower, shadows stretching long. The terrain grew harsher, jagged rocks tearing at their boots, steep inclines forcing them to crawl on hands and knees. Every scrape of fabric against stone sounded too loud. Finally, they reached a ledge overlooking the enemy outpost. There it was, the cage of chain link and corrugated steel, lights burning against the darkness, armed guards packing in lazy arcs. Somewhere inside, the captured operative waited. The commander exhaled hard. This is it. The plan unfolded in murmured whispers. Distraction to the east, silent breach on the west fence, extraction in under 10 minutes. But she saw something they didn't, a glint on the ridge above the outpost, glass catching moonlight. Sniper! Her throat tightened. It was the same angle, the same place where her brother had fallen. The memory hit like a blade, her brother shouting, the crack of a shot, his body collapsing before she could reach him. She had replayed it for years. The moment she didn't speak, the moment she froze. Her breath quickened. Her hands trembled. If she told them now, if she revealed the sniper, they would know her secret. They would know she had been here before, had failed here before. But if she stayed silent, history would repeat itself. Her eyes closed for a single heartbeat, and when they opened again she forced the words out. "Sniper, ridge, east side." The commander snapped toward her, eyes narrowing. Then he raised his scope. Seconds later he hissed into the radio, "Confirmed." The team adjusted instantly, shifting positions, planning around the hidden threat. No questions asked, no doubts cast. She had spoken, and because she had, lives were spared. But her chest burned with more than relief. The valley had demanded her voice, and she had given it. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was earned. They waited for the moment, hearts sinking in nervous rhythm. The wind stilled. The valley held its breath. And then the mission moved. Explosions tore the eastern horizon, distant but sharp. The outpost guards scrambled, shouting, weapons raised. Shadows darted toward the noise. The squad moved, fast, silent, cutting through wire, slipping past towers, breathing as one. She entered the compound last, her rifle sweeping every corner. The smell of dust and oil clung to the air. Somewhere inside, muffled cries echoed faintly. The operative. Her pulse hammered. The mission was within reach. But in the hollow of her chest, something darker stirred. Because she knew, the valley never gave without taking. And the silence she carried, it would be tested again before they left. How much could a whisper matter in a place built on screams? The compound loomed around them, iron and shadow pressing close. Every fence they slipped through, every corner they turned, carried the weight of risk. The outpost was alive now, guards racing toward the eastern distraction, boots pounding against gravel, voices echoing sharp in the night air. But inside the cage of corrugated walls, the squad moved like smoke, silent, careful. One wrong sound could pull all that chaos back onto them. She led the rear, her eyes flicking across rooftops, doorways, windows lit with harsh yellow lamps. She counted breaths, footsteps, seconds. Every detail mattered. Silence wasn't just absence. It was calculation, discipline, survival. The young soldier stayed close. Too close. His nerves betrayed him, his rifle shook slightly, his head turned too often. She touched his arm once, grounding him. He exhaled, steadied. Again, her silence carried him further than words ever could. At the heart of the compound, a small building squatted beneath a floodlight. Its windows were barred, its door reinforced, and from within, a faint, desperate sound leaked into the night, a man's muffled voice, broken, almost praying. The commander signaled. Two men advanced, cutting the lock with practiced efficiency. Metal snapped like a gunshot. The squad froze, listening, but the distraction held, no alarm yet. She entered last, her rifle sweeping the dark interior. The air stank of sweat, rust, and damp earth. In the corner, chained to a steel post, was the operative. His face was battered, eyes swollen, lips cracked, but he was alive. For a moment, silence gripped the room. Relief, disbelief. Then the squad surged forward, unchaining him, whispering comfort, slipping a canteen to his lips. But she stayed back, her eyes narrowing. Something was wrong. The operative's eyes flicked toward her, just briefly, but enough. They were too wide, too alert, not just relief, warning. Her chest tightened. She scanned the shadows. And there it was, the faint red blink in the corner of the ceiling. Not a camera, a sensor, motion triggered. Her lips parted. Words clawed up her throat. But before she could speak, a siren wailed outside, splitting the night open. The valley roared awake. Shouts erupted. Boots thundered against gravel. Floodlights cut through darkness, slicing the compound into harsh white and black. The distraction had run its course. Now all eyes turned here. The commander cursed, dragging the operative to his feet. Move out now. The squad surged into motion, carrying the half-conscious man between them. She followed, every step heavy, every shadow alive with danger. Gunfire cracked across the compound. Bullets sparked against walls, rattling through metal. The night exploded in chaos. She dropped behind cover, rifle snapping up. Her silence shattered in controlled bursts, one shot, another, each finding its mark. Guards fell, lights shattered, smoke thickened. The squad pushed toward the fence, dragging the operative, shouting over the din. But she didn't hear their words. She only heard the valley, the memory, the echo of her brother's last stand. The young soldier screamed, a sharp cry of pain. He collapsed against the fence, clutching his leg, blood spilling between his fingers. Panic flashed in his eyes, wild and consuming. The squad hesitated. Time slowed. Gunfire chewed closer, walls splintering around them. The commander shouted for them to move, to leave him. But she didn't, she couldn't. Her silence broke in a single word, sharp and commanding. No. The squad froze. The tone cut deeper than any order. She dragged the young soldier up, her strength raw, unrelenting. He cried out, nearly collapsing again, but she bore the weight, shoving him toward the fence. Her rifle swung up one-handed, firing controlled bursts as she moved. Every shot was deliberate, cold, precise. Not rage, not panic, discipline. The squad covered her, pulling the soldier through the gap in the wire. Bullets tore past, sparks showering against metal, dust stinging eyes. And then explosion. The building they had breached erupted in flame, a fireball splitting the compound in two. Heat seared the air, shockwaves rattling their bones. The ground shook, throwing her to her knees. She scrambled up, ears ringing, smoke clawing at her lungs. Through the haze, she saw the operative being hauled clear, the squad pushing forward. The commander shouted something, his voice lost in the roar. She turned to cover their retreat and froze. A figure stood on the ridge, a sniper's silhouette, rifle glinting in firelight. Her breath stopped. The past and present collided. Her brother's voice, his fall, his silence, all of it burned through her. But this time she didn't freeze. Her scope snapped up, her finger tightened. Her silence spoke through steel. One shot. The silhouette jerked back, collapsing into darkness. The valley echoed once, then fell still. Her chest heaved. Sweat streaked her face, cutting lines through dust and ash. She lowered the rifle, her hands trembling, not from fear, from release. The squad dragged her forward out of the compound into the wild night. Behind them, flames devoured the cage, smoke twisting into the stars. The operative gasped against the commander's shoulder. The young soldier limped between two teammates, his face pale but alive. She moved in silence, every step carved into her bones. They had survived, but the valley was not finished. She knew it. The silence pressed against her again, heavier than ever. Because victory came with a price, always. And the valley had not yet taken its due. The night had grown colder, the air heavy with an eerie silence that seemed to choke the forest. The moon, a fractured silver disk behind drifting clouds, cast uneven light over the ruined village where she and her dwindling unit had taken cover. Fires from earlier skirmishes smoldered low in the distance, painting the horizon in muted shades of orange and ash. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound could have been the enemy. She sat against a broken wall, her rifle balanced across her knees, but her thoughts were far heavier than the steel in her hands. She was not merely surviving anymore, she was leading, and leadership carried a burden no bullet could match. Hours earlier, when the last of their communications had failed, the unit had turned to her, not out of protocol, not even out of rank, but because she was the only one who seemed unshaken. Inside, she had been breaking. But on the outside she had stood tall, eyes steady, jaw set, carrying the silence of someone who had already seen the abyss and refused to fall into it again. Now, in this temporary pocket of fragile quiet, the cost of that strength pressed down on her chest. The unspoken bond. Her soldiers, 5 left from the dozen she had started with, rested in broken houses and barns around her. Some were awake, staring blankly into the night, unable to sleep. Others shifted restlessly in shallow, haunted dreams. None of them laughed anymore. None of them even spoke unless necessary. The only sounds were the whispers of wind through shattered windows and the occasional crack of wood as the ruined structures groaned under the weight of memory. She looked at their faces one by one. She remembered their names. She remembered their voices before the silence set in. Private Ramos, who used to tell stories about his daughter's drawings taped inside his helmet. Sergeant Hale, who once promised he'd write a book about this mission if they made it home. Corporal Nader, who carried his mother's prayer beads wrapped around his wrist like armor. She remembered the ones who were gone, too. Each loss was carved into her memory like a scar. And yet they looked to her. They still believed somehow that she could carry them forward. The decision that could not wait. By midnight, the dilemma weighed too heavily to ignore. They could remain hidden here, conserving strength, hopping for rescue that might never come. Or they could move, risking exposure but pushing closer to the extraction point that felt like a fatting dream. Her second-in-command, Sergeant Hale, leaned against the doorway of the broken wall where she sat. His voice was low but steady. "We can't stay here. If the enemy tracks us, this place becomes a grave. But if we move, we risk being cut down in the open. What's your call?" She didn't answer right away. She let the silence stretch, watching the embers of a distant fire rise into the sky like fragments of broken stars. The truth clawed at her. Every decision she made could kill them. Every order was a gamble with their lives. Finally she spoke, her voice steady, though her chest tightened with the weight of her words. "We move at first light. We'll use the fog to cover us. South Ridge, then east toward the river. It's longer, but the enemy patrols are thinner there." Hale studied her face for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "They'll follow you. Whatever comes, they'll follow." It wasn't praise, it wasn't reassurance. It was a reminder. Memories she could not escape. When Hale left to brief the others, she closed her eyes. The forest pressed in around her with its silence, and memory surged back in a flood she could not hold back. Her father's voice. A man who had worn the uniform before her, who had taught her that duty was not about survival. It was about carrying others, even when the weight broke you. She remembered the way he said it the night before his last deployment when she was just a child. "Storms don't last forever," he had told her, "but those who stand through them carry the scars forever." Now she finally understood what he meant. She had become the storm's survivor, the one forced to hold steady when everything around her shattered, and the scars were already forming in her heart. Dawn over broken ground. When the first thin veil of dawn began to spread across the horizon, the unit stirred. No orders were shouted. No loud calls rallied them together. They moved quietly, efficiently, like ghosts who had done this too many times before. Her boots sank into the damp soil as she led them out of the ruins. The fog hung thick over the forest floor, curling around trees like smoke. Each step forward was a gamble, but they moved in silence, trusting her direction. Every rustle of leaves made her grip her rifle tighter. Every distant crack sounded like a shot. But she did not falter. She moved like she had done this path 100 times before, though in truth, each step was improvisation, each breath a prayer. The test of fire. They were almost to the ridge when the first shot rang out. It was not a warning. It was an ambush. Bullets cut through the fog, snapping branches and tearing bark from trees. Her soldiers dropped to cover, returning fire in disciplined bursts. She hit the ground hard, her cheek pressed against the cold earth, the metallic tang of gunpowder already thick in the air. The enemy had them pinned. For one frozen second, doubt clawed at her throat. This was the decision she had made. She had brought them here. But hesitation was death, and she refused to let death take them without a fight. "Flank left," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Hail suppressing fire, Ramos with me." The orders came out sharp, precise, unyielding. The kind of orders that left no room for fear. And they moved. Through fire and fear. The fight stretched on longer than she could measure. Time blurred into flashes of muzzle fire and the pounding rhythm of her heart. She led the push, moving through the fog, cutting through fear with each command. They lost one Corporal Nader, struck before he could reach cover. His body lay twisted, the beads still around his wrist. She forced herself not to look too long, not to stop, not to break. By the time the fog began to thin and the shooting slowed, the ridge was theirs. The enemy had been driven back, but the cost was heavy. Her chest heaved, lungs burning. Blood mixed with dirt on her hands, though she couldn't tell whose it was. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire had been. Carrying the weight. They regrouped on the ridge, 4 now instead of 5. The loss was etched into every face, though no one spoke it aloud. They simply looked to her again, eyes filled with something more than fear, something closer to desperate belief. And in that moment, she realized the truth. She was not just leading them, she was carrying them. Every decision, every loss, every step forward was hers to bear. And though it broke her inside, she would not let them see it. She would not let them fall. For storms could last days, weeks, even months. But she had promised herself she would last longer, longer than fear, longer than pain, longer than death itself. And so, with the ridge behind them and the unknown ahead, she rose once more and whispered the only words she could. "Keep moving." And they did. The ridge had been won, but the victory was hollow. The forest below stretched in endless waves of gray mist, its silence broken only by the uneven breaths of the 4 who remained. Behind them lay the body of Corporal Nader, left among the smoldering ruins of memory, and ahead of them stretched the vast unknown. She stood at the edge of the ridge, her boots buried in damp earth, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The river lay somewhere beyond the trees, its winding current the only path toward the extraction point. If they reached it, they might still have a chance. If they failed, the ridge would not be their last grave. The men behind her waited without question. Their faces were lined with exhaustion, eyes hollow from too many nights without sleep, but still, they looked at her as though she carried the map written on her bones. And in a way, she did. For every step forward was no longer guided by orders on paper but by instinct, willpower, and the relentless refusal to let go. The march into silence. The fog thickened as they descended from the ridge. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, each breath heavy, clinging to their lungs. Their footsteps were muffled in the soft soil, the silence pressing down until the smallest sound felt like a scream. Private Ramos, carrying the heaviest pack, whispered once, breaking the silence. "Do you think command even knows we're still out here?" His voice cracked under the weight of the question. She glanced at him but didn't stop walking. Her answer came steady, though her chest tightened with doubt. "They'll know when we make it back. Until then, we don't ask questions we can't afford." The words weren't comfort, they were survival, and Ramos understood that. He lowered his gaze and pressed forward, the pack straps biting into his shoulders. The enemy that moved without sound. It wasn't long before she sensed them. The faint shift of movement in the mist, the unnatural rhythm in the silence. Her instincts flared before her mind fully understood. She raised her hand, signaling halt. The unit froze, crouching low among the trees. The forest seemed empty, yet every nerve in her body screamed that they were not alone. She pressed her ear to the ground, listening. A faint vibration, too steady, too synchronized. Footsteps. Dozens. Ambush. Her grip on the rifle tightened. They had no cover here, no fortifications, just trees and fog. To stay was death. To move might also be death, but hesitation wasn't an option. "Northwest," she whispered sharply. "Break line, move quiet." They slipped through the trees like shadows, each movement careful, calculated. But the footsteps grew louder, closer, spreading out in a hunter's arc. The enemy wasn't searching blindly, they knew. A desperate crossing. By late morning, the forest thinned, and the sound of rushing water rose in the distance. The river. But relief was short-lived. The water was not calm. It raged in a wild current, swollen by recent rains, frothing white against jagged rocks. To cross it would mean risking lives against nature's fury. To stay meant facing the enemy closing in behind them. She crouched at the riverbank, studying the current, weighing risks in silence. The men waited for her word. Every choice she made now carried blood in its shadow. "Ramos, tie the packs, they'll float if we lose grip. Hale, cover our rear, we cross now." Ramos opened his mouth as if to argue, then closed it again. Hale simply nodded, his rifle steady, his eyes fixed on the tree line where shadows shifted in the mist. They tied what they could, binding gear with torn cloth and rope, then waded into the freezing water. The current seized them instantly, dragging at their legs with a force that threatened to tear them under. She went first, forcing her way through the torrent, her muscles straining with each step. The cold stabbed into her bones like knives, the roar of the river drowning out all other sound. Behind her, Ramos cursed under his breath, Hale growled orders to steady their footing, and Private Vey, the youngest, clung to his rifle like a lifeline. Halfway across, gunfire erupted. The storm on the river. Bullets tore through the mist, slamming into the water, spraying arcs around them. The enemy had reached the bank. "Down," she shouted, though the command was almost useless. There was no cover in the torrent, no safe place in the rushing water. Hale returned fire, his shots controlled and precise despite the unstable footing. Ramos struggled to keep his balance as the current seized his pack and nearly dragged him under. She grabbed his arm, pulling with every ounce of strength, the river trying to claim them both. A bullet grazed her shoulder, a searing burn of pain, but she forced herself not to falter. "Go," she roared, shoving Ramos forward, pushing him toward the far bank. The crossing became chaos. Water, gunfire, shouts, the scream of bullets tearing through mist. For a moment it seemed impossible, the weight of death pressing in from all sides. But she pushed, clawed, fought, until her boots struck solid ground on the opposite bank. She collapsed into the mud, dragging Ramos beside her, reaching back for Vey, who stumbled, nearly swept away before she seized his vest and pulled him in. Hale came last, still firing, his face a mask of iron focus. He dove across the rocks as bullets shredded the water behind him, rolling to his knees, his rifle never leaving his grip. And then silence. The mist swallowed the enemy. The river stood between them now, a barrier of roaring white. They had crossed, but the price had yet to be counted. The wound and the weight. Her shoulder throbbed with fire where the bullet had grazed her. Blood soaked through her sleeve, warm against the cold. She pressed her hand to it, steadying her breath. Hale noticed but said nothing. His eyes met hers briefly, carrying the unspoken truth. She could not show weakness. Not now. Not while they still needed her strength. She straightened, ignoring the pain, forcing her voice steady. "Move, we follow the river east. They'll try to circle around, but the current will slow them." The men obeyed, though exhaustion dragged at every step. Their boots squelched in mud, their faces pale from the cold, but they did not question her orders. Because questioning her meant questioning hope itself. The fire within. By evening they found shelter beneath a natural overhang of rock, where the river curved sharply and carved out a hollow. They built no fire. Light was death. Instead, they huddled in the damp cold, eating ration crumbs with shaking hands. Private Vay's voice trembled when he finally spoke. "Why do you keep pushing us forward? We could have stayed back. We could have waited hidden. Why risk all this?" She looked at him, the youngest of them, his face still carrying traces of boyhood beneath the grime. He wasn't accusing her. He was asking for something to hold on to. Her answer came quietly, but each word struck like stone. "Because storms don't wait for us to be ready. Because fear doesn't leave if we hide. Because if we stop moving, then the river wasn't the only thing we lost today." Vay swallowed hard, then lowered his eyes, nodding once. They ate in silence after that, but she could feel their resolve harden again. Not out of blind faith, but because they needed her fire to keep their own from going out. The night's reflection. When the others drifted into uneasy sleep, she remained awake, her back pressed to the cold stone, her rifle across her lap. The pain in her shoulder pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, but it wasn't the wound that kept her awake. It was the faces, Nader, the others lost before him, each carried like ghosts at her side. And yet she knew she could not allow grief to hollow her. Not now. Each loss was carved into her, but each life still alive was a promise she had yet to fulfill. Her father's words echoed again, as though carried on the wind through the trees. "Storms don't last forever, but the ones who endure them become the shelter for others." She closed her eyes briefly, not for rest, but to hold on to that truth. When dawn came, she would rise again, not because she was unbroken, but because they needed her to be. Because even as death shadowed their every step, she had vowed to last longer, longer than fear, longer than the storm, longer than death itself. And so, with the river behind them and the unknown stretching ahead, she sat in silence, watching the darkness, waiting for the light to come. How long could a body survive when the mind wanted to quit first? The dawn broke pale and thin, casting silver light across the river valley. The mist clung to their boots as they moved, each step heavier than the last. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, exhaustion carved shadows beneath their eyes, and the silence between them grew darker with every mile. They had rations once, but the river had claimed most of what little they carried. Now only scraps remained, half a protein bar, a pouch of dried fruit, crumbs measured in careful pinches. 4 soldiers, 1 meal's worth of hope. She walked ahead, her shoulders still burning with the wound, her hand brushing the rifle sling, her eyes never leaving the tree line. The enemy was out there, circling, waiting for them to stumble. But hunger was the sharper enemy now, one that hollowed men from the inside out. The breaking of silence. Private Ramos staggered once, catching himself on a branch. His breath came ragged, his face pale with more than just fatigue. He sat hard on a fallen log, dropping his pack with a grunt. "I can't," he muttered. "Not like this, not without food. We're walking toward death." His voice cracked, desperate, raw. For a moment the forest itself seemed to lean closer, listening. Vay glanced at her, his young face streaked with dirt and worry. Hale stayed silent, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the ground. She turned toward Ramos. She didn't snap at him, didn't command. Instead, she crouched low, her own body trembling from fatigue, and met his gaze. "Then die sitting," she said quietly. "But if you stand, if you take one more step, you're alive. And while you're alive, there's still a chance." Ramos's hands shook. His throat bobbed as if he might argue again. But then his shoulders sagged and he nodded, pushing himself upright. Sometimes silence wasn't enough. Sometimes words, sharp and spare, were the only rope left to pull a man from the edge. The Hunger Games. By midday, they stumbled upon wild berries growing in a thicket, dark clusters hanging heavy on the branches. Hope surged through Vay's eyes as he rushed forward, reaching for them. "Wait," she said sharply, grabbing his wrist before he could pluck one. The others froze, watching her. She pulled a leaf, crushed it between her fingers, smelled it, then touched it to her tongue. A bitter sting spread instantly, her mouth tightening against the taste. Poison. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she spat the leaf into the dirt. She looked at Vay, who had gone pale, shame flickering across his face. "Not everything that feeds the eyes feeds the body," she murmured. They moved on, hungrier than before, their bodies dragging like weights. Every step became an act of will, every breath a negotiation with collapse. Hale's story. It was Hale, the oldest among them, who finally broke the silence that afternoon. His voice was rough, as though unused for weeks, but steady. "You ever notice," he said, "how hunger makes the world sharper, like you see everything for the first time, every leaf, every shadow?" Ramos gave a bitter laugh. "I see nothing but pain." Hale shook his head. "Pain is the reminder you're still here." Then he told them a story, not of war, but of his childhood, of growing up on a farm where winters were long and food was scarce. He spoke of nights when he and his sister split a single loaf of bread, each pretending they were full so the other could eat. "She didn't make it through the last winter," he said quietly. "I did, and every time I thought I couldn't take another step, I remembered her face. I remembered that she'd given her hunger to me. That's why I walk, even now." His voice cracked at the end, but he didn't turn away. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with weight, with memory, with the kind of truth that doesn't need answering. Even Vay, whose youth still clung to him like a shadow, seemed older after hearing it. The fever of doubt. That night they camped without fire again, crouched low beneath a canopy of roots where the earth curved like a shallow cave. The river's voice was distant now, a whisper rather than a roar, and the forest was alive with insects and distant calls of unseen animals. She sat awake, her rifle across her knees, her shoulder wound throbbing with each heartbeat. Fever licked at the edges of her mind, sweat cooling on her forehead despite the night chill. Her silence had carried them this far, but doubt crept in like a thief. Was she pushing them toward salvation, or toward a slower death? Would any of them see the extraction point? Would command even be waiting? Her hand trembled as she reached for her canteen, nearly empty. The water tasted of metal and mud. She swallowed slowly, rationing not just for her throat, but for her conscience. She thought of her brother again, of his last stand in the valley. He had been silent too in the end, not with fear but with resolve. Maybe silence wasn't a weight, maybe it was an inheritance. A crack in the armor. The next morning Private Vay broke down. He tried to hide it, wiping his face with dirty hands, turning away. But his shoulders shook, his breath came in shallow gasps, and when he finally spoke, his voice shattered. "I'm not ready to die here," he whispered. "I don't even know what I've done with my life yet. I thought I was a soldier, but I'm just scared. I'm scared all the time." The words hung in the air, too fragile to touch. She didn't speak right away. She let the silence hold him first, wrap around the confession like a cloak. Then she placed a hand on his shoulder, firm but gentle. Being scared doesn't make you less of a soldier, she said softly. It makes you human. What matters is that you keep walking scared. His tears didn't stop, but his breathing steadied. And when they rose to move again, he walked a little straighter, though his face still carried the storm. The edge of collapse. By late afternoon, the forest opened into a clearing where the sun poured down in golden shafts. But the beauty was cruel. It only reminded them how weak they had become. Ramos collapsed first, dropping to his knees, his pack sliding off into the grass. He panted heavily, sweat dripping from his brow. "I can't," he whispered again, this time with no strength left for defiance. Hale crouched beside him, placing a hand on his back, his own body trembling with fatigue. Vay stood nearby, swaying, his lips cracked from thirst. She looked at them, 3 men worn thin to the bone, their spirits fraying. She felt the same inside, a hollow carved by hunger and exhaustion. But if she faltered now, they would follow. So she did the only thing she knew. She stood tall, even as her knees wavered. She lifted her chin toward the horizon and spoke words her father had once spoken to her, words that now became hers. "Storms don't ask if you're ready. They test you when you're not. If you can't run, you crawl. If you can't crawl, you breathe. And if you can still breathe, then you fight to see one more dawn." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The silence around it made it echo like thunder. Slowly, painfully, Ramos pushed himself back to his feet. Hale steadied him. Vay clenched his jaw and nodded. And they walked again. The glimpse of hope. As the sun sank low, painting the sky in streaks of fire, she caught sight of something through the trees. A faint glimmer, smoke rising, thin and gray. Not from the enemy, from civilians, a village. Food, water, shelter. But also risk. The enemy might already be there, or worse, waiting for them to arrive. Her heart pounded, torn between desperation and caution. She didn't tell the others what she saw, not yet. Hope could be poison if given too soon. So she kept walking, her silence carrying them forward, her eyes fixed on the smoke curling into the sky. Because sometimes salvation was a step away. And sometimes it was the bait of a trap. She didn't know which yet. But she knew they would find out together. The camp was quiet, too quiet. Not the kind of silence that brought peace, but the kind that pressed on the skin like a weight, making every heartbeat feel too loud. For Alina, the silence felt alive, waiting, watching, hunting. She had learned long ago that when the world went this still, something was coming, something bad. She sat in the ruins of a half-collapsed building, rifle across her knees, eyes fixed on the distance. The air carried the smell of burned fuel and scorched earth. Distant thunder rolled, though she knew it wasn't thunder. Somewhere beyond the hills, machines of war were moving. Her comm crackled. "Eagle 3, you awake?" It was Tors, her spotter, though now his voice sounded older, tired. "Barely," Alina replied, scanning the horizon. "They'll come tonight." A pause. "You always know." It wasn't prophecy. It was survival instinct sharpened by years of living at the edge. She could feel the storm of battle before it arrived, just as she once felt weather shifts back home in the mountains. Her father used to call her the child who listened to the wind. Now, that instinct was the only thing keeping her unit alive. The last march of shadows. The command tent had been stripped bare, maps gone, radios silent. Orders were scarce, and the faces of the men and women around her were marked by exhaustion and quiet dread. The war had ground them down like stones in a river. Alina stepped inside, boots leaving faint marks in the dust. Commander Haze stood over the table, hands pressed against the wood, staring at a single sheet, the last reconnaissance report. His jaw was tight, his uniform torn, his eyes red with sleeplessness. "They're coming with everything," he said without looking up. "Armor, drones, infantry, air support. They know this ridge is the last gate before the valley. If we break, the villages below burn." The weight of it pressed down on them all. One ridge, one battered company, and an army moving toward them like a tide of steel. Elena's voice was calm. Then we don't break. Haze finally lifted his head. His eyes met hers, and in that moment something steadied in him. She wasn't giving a speech. She wasn't promising miracles. She was simply stating a fact, the way one might state that the sun will rise or that fire will burn. "All right," Haze muttered, "we hold." A letter never sent. That night, while others tried to sleep, Elena sat under a broken tree with a scrap of paper. The stars above were faint, hidden by smoke, but she wrote anyway by the dim glow of a half-dead lantern. Her words were not poetry, they were not strategy, they were simply pieces of her heart. To my mother, if this reaches you, know that I stood where others could not. I am tired, but I am not broken. I fight because the ground here is not just soil. It is the memory of every child who laughed in our streets, of every prayer whispered in kitchens, of every song sung in the dark. I cannot let that memory be erased. She paused, fingers trembling, then continued. If I fall, let them not say I was brave. Let them say I was faithful. Faithful to you, to home, to the storm inside me that would not bow. I love you more than these words can hold. She folded the paper, slipped it into her jacket, and exhaled slowly. She knew the letter would likely never be read, but writing it gave her strength. When the sky fell. At dawn, the storm broke. It began with drones, black shapes tearing across the sky, dropping fire on the ridge. The ground shook, dust exploding upward. Men and women scrambled for cover. The mountain echoed with the scream of engines and the roar of missiles. "Elena," Torres shouted, "east flank snipers moving in." She swung her rifle, eyes narrowing through the scope. 3 enemy marksmen crawled across the rocks, moving with practiced precision. One breath in, one breath out. Her finger tightened. The first dropped. The second froze, panic breaking discipline. A second shot. Silence. The third tried to retreat, but Elena's shot found him before he vanished into smoke. The ridge was fire, stone, and chaos. Screams echoed through comms, mixed with orders. Explosions cracked the earth like thunderclaps. Yet in the heart of it, Elena felt a strange calm. Fear was there, yes, but beneath it was a clarity sharper than steel. "This is the line," she whispered, almost to herself. "We don't move back." The weight of leadership. By midday, Haze was wounded. Shrapnel had torn his shoulder, blood soaking through his uniform. He tried to keep shouting orders, but his voice faltered. The company needed a spine, someone to bind them before the line shattered. And so all eyes turned to Elena. She hadn't asked for command, she had never wanted it, but war doesn't wait for desire, it demands. "Elena," Haze rasped, gripping her wrist, "you keep them together, do not let this ridge fall." She looked at him for a long moment, then she nodded. When she turned, the soldiers were watching her, not with doubt but with desperate hope. Her voice was firm, steady, carrying above the gunfire. "Listen to me. You are not fighting for orders. You are not fighting for medals. You are fighting for the people behind us, for the children who sleep in peace because you stand here. We will not let them through. Do you hear me?" A roar answered her, not polished, not rehearsed, but raw. They heard her, they believed. The duel and the smoke. Late afternoon. The battle had shifted into brutal rhythm. Waves of soldiers crashed against the ridge, only to be thrown back by stubborn fire. Yet the cost was heavy. Every hour more of her people fell. And then came him. Through the smoke, an enemy sniper, tall, armored, his rifle glowing with tech far beyond their own. His shots were merciless, cutting down 2 of her squad in seconds. His presence turned the air into dread. "Elena, he's hunting you," Torres warned. She knew. She could feel his scope searching for her, as though his gaze was a hand pressing against her chest. She moved low, crawling across broken stone, weaving between shattered walls. Every instinct screamed that one mistake would end her. Then she saw him, perched on a steel beam, calm, waiting like a predator. The duel stretched into silence. One breath, two, their rifles rose in unison. Her mind flickered to her mother's smile, to the laughter of children, to the paper folded in her jacket. She let the storm inside her steady, not rage but resolve. One shot. His helmet cracked, his body slumped. The ridge roared in relief. Alina only exhaled, lowering her rifle. She had no time to celebrate. There was still war to fight. Dusk on the ridge. As the sun bled red into the horizon, the battlefield was a graveyard of smoke and fire. Both sides had bled dearly, but the enemy was not finished. Scouts reported armor moving in, machines heavy enough to crush stone, rolling steadily toward them. The kind of force no small company could stop. Her soldiers looked at her. Fear was in their eyes, but so was trust. They had followed her this far. "Alina," Tors whispered, "what do we do when the mountain itself can't hold?" She looked at the burning sky, then at the valley below, the homes, the memories, the fragile hope resting in her hands. Her answer was quiet, "Then we become the mountain." And as darkness fell, she prepared her people for the storm that would decide everything. The night came like a curtain of ash. It did not fall gently, nor with the promise of rest. It fell like a weight. The ridge lay scarred, fire still licking at broken stones, bodies strewn across its jagged crown. For hours they had fought, and for hours they had refused to yield. But now the sound came, a low, grinding thunder, metal against earth. The tanks were here. Alina stood at the edge of the ridge, wind pulling strands of hair from her face. Her uniform was torn, dust clinging to every crease. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were steady. Behind her, what remained of the company gathered. 30 men and women, battered shadows of the 100 who had begun this stand. Faces painted with blood and soot, eyes hollow with loss, yet burning with defiance. They looked to her, not because she was unbroken, but because she was broken and still standing. "Listen," she began, voice low yet carrying. "What comes now is more than we can match. Steel, fire, and machines built to crush us. But hear me, they cannot crush what we hold. They cannot touch the memory of the ones we've lost, nor the love that kept us fighting. They think tonight ends us. They are wrong." The ridge fell into silence except for the grinding approach of enemy armor. Alina raised her rifle, the gesture simple yet absolute. "We hold, until the last breath, until the last light." And the company answered, a raw, broken cry that shook even the mountain. The iron tide. The first tank crested the hill, its cannon glinting in firelight. Behind it another, then another, a wall of steel. "Alina," Tors shouted, shoving an anti-tank launcher into her hands. She dropped to one knee, breath measured. The world slowed. She could almost hear her father's voice, steady as the mountain. "Do not rush. Do not fear." Her finger tightened. The launcher roared. The missile streaked through smoke, colliding with the first tank. The explosion tore the air apart, fire swallowing the machine whole. For a heartbeat, hope surged. The soldiers cheered. But then the others pressed forward, merciless, their cannons thundering. Earth split open. Shards of stone rained like knives. Still they fought. Grenades hurled. Rifles blazing. Men and women charging against machines that should have been unstoppable. Every second one was bought with blood. And through it all, Alina moved like a force of nature. Cover to cover, weapon in hand, voice cutting through chaos. "Left flank, hold steady, Tors with me." Wherever she stood, the line refused to break. The fall of brothers. But war is greedy. Tors fell first. A shell ripped the ground beside him, fire swallowing his body. His scream echoed for a moment, then vanished into smoke. Alina froze, staring, her closest comrade, her shadow in battle, gone. She wanted to scream, to collapse, but her people's eyes turned to her, desperate. If she broke now, the ridge would fall with her. Her throat burned. She swallowed the grief, forcing it into steel. "Forward," she shouted, voice raw. "Do not stop." Inside she was breaking. Outside she was unyielding. That was leadership. That was the cruel bargain. Fire in the blood. The tanks pressed harder, their cannons carving the ridge into rubble. Yet somehow, impossibly, the company endured. They fought in the cracks of stone, in the shadows of fire, teeth bared, refusing to let the enemy claim the pass. But numbers dwindled, 20, 15, 10. At last only a handful stood with Alina, backs to the valley. Smoke choked the air, flames painting their faces. Alina, one whispered, a young soldier barely out of boyhood. His hands shook around his rifle. Is this the end? She placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. Not the end, the beginning of their fear. They will remember this night. They will remember you. The boy nodded, tears streaking down his dirty face. Then he lifted his rifle and fired into the dark. The enemy commander. Through the smoke, a figure appeared, tall, armored in black, his presence radiating authority. The enemy commander. He moved forward calmly as though certain of victory. He raised his voice, amplified by a device that echoed across the ridge. Lay down your arms. You have fought bravely, but this is over. Surrender and I will grant you life. The words hung heavy in the smoke. The last of Alina's soldiers glanced at her. Her answer came not in words but in a single rifle shot. The bullet struck the commander's shoulder, sparks flying from his armor. He staggered back, stunned by the defiance. This ridge, Alina shouted, is not yours to take. The last handful of soldiers roared with her, unleashing their fire in a storm of defiance. Alone on the ridge. But one by one they fell, the boy with tears, the medic who had carried the wounded, the silent sniper who had never missed. Until only Alina remained. Her rifle was empty, her body ached with wounds, blood slicked her arm, smoke burned her lungs. The tanks surrounded the ridge now, their cannons aimed directly at her. Soldiers advanced cautiously, unsure why this lone figure still stood. Alina raised her head. Her vision blurred, but her spirit burned brighter than the flames around her. She thought of her letter still folded in her jacket. She thought of her mother, of Tor's, of every face now silent. Her lips whispered, barely audible. I lasted longer than storms, longer than fear, longer than death. And with her last strength, she raised her rifle once more, empty, but held high like a banner. The last light. The enemy paused. Even their machines seemed to hesitate. One soldier against an army refusing to kneel. And then from the valley below came a sound. Engines, dozens of them, Allied reinforcements racing toward the ridge. They had heard the fight, seen the flames, and come. The enemy faltered. Confusion rippled through their ranks. The tanks withdrew slightly, their advance breaking. Alina swayed, barely standing. Her eyes lifted to the horizon, and for the first time that night she saw dawn. A sliver of gold breaking through smoke, light spilling across the battlefield. She smiled faintly. The ridge had held. Her knees buckled, the world tilted, but as she fell the sun rose and the ridge was bathed in light. Epilogue: the memory that endured. They found her hours later, alive but unconscious, clutching the folded paper against her chest, the letter she had written to her mother. When the story spread, it was no longer just about a battle. It was about a woman who stood when no one else could, who fought when surrender seemed certain, who endured storms, fear, and even death, and became a beacon for all who came after. Generations later, soldiers still spoke of the last light of the ridge. They did not remember her for medals or rank. They remembered her because she was faithful. And sometimes, when dawn broke over the valley, the wind carried a whisper across the stones. I lasted,